One thing I've learned about Dennis Gates teams, they are never out of it. Plus, why I don't think there's any chance that Eli Drinkwitz goes to Texas A&M despite their dump trucks full of money they can drive up to his house. So let's talk about all that and some Florida injury updates right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail, you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100 daily of fantasy sports made easy. And it certainly wasn't easy for Missouri last night, was it? In fact, Minnesota in particular got off to an unbelievably hot start. Felt like they were not going to miss a shot there for the first few minutes. Though it wasn't just hot shooting by Minnesota. It wasn't just as though they were getting lucky or something. They were getting much better shots than Missouri overall early in the ball game. And while I don't mind a lot of three-pointers being shot by the Tigers whatsoever, just too many difficult ones in the first half. It's one thing when you're getting wide open threes on ball movement, off dribble penetration, getting the ball inside out, that type of deal, but just way too often Missouri felt like they were putting the ball up quickly in the shot clock just for the sake of the best look, the first look is what I'm trying to say. Missouri too often, in my opinion, just taking the first shot and instead of taking the best shot that they could potentially get. But of course, the Tigers did weather the storm okay, trailing by 6 at halftime. Interestingly, true freshman Jordan Butler started the second half, immediately got a steal there and played some more good defense, I thought, in the second half. His presence was definitely known. On the other hand, considering I don't think most observers thought that Butler was going to be getting significant minutes early in the season, especially starting the second half there, that definitely tells me that Dennis Gates is still trying to figure out his best combinations in the front court. Certainly, I think the defense looks better when Noah Carter isn't in there, for instance, but obviously the offense is clearly better with him in there, either at the 4 or the 5 spot, one of those forward spots. And again, it's just a trade-off with him and Aiden Shaw, for instance. Shaw had 4 blocks in just 18 minutes and appears to be a real weapon on the defensive end of the court. But in those 18 minutes, he did not attempt a shot. So Shaw is still trying to figure out what his role is offensively on this club. And honestly, as much as I've loved his defense so far and his activity, just how hard Shaw has been playing, I'm a little bit disappointed that he isn't further along offensively. I thought in high school he showed more than what he's shown so far offensively here at Missouri. If anything, I'd like to see him be a little bit more aggressive offensively and just figure out who he is. But what do I know? Dennis Gates definitely knows this ball club awfully well. And I do have to question one other thing, though, which is, again, for the second straight game, at least here, I'm questioning, why is Tamar Bates not playing more? He played a ton down the stretch, played the really important minutes, but still just 15 minutes for Bates. Feels to me he's a guy who's important enough. He should be playing at least 25, if not 30-plus minutes a night. Another frustrating night for Caleb Grill, and in the second half, he let that frustration boil over to the point where he slammed the ground with his hand, got a technical foul, and kind of barely brushed, I would say, into the official. But in his frustration there, I guess the official felt like, hey, that was out of line. And by the letter of the law, by the technicality, I guess, yes, Caleb Grill deserved his second technical foul and to get tossed out of the game there. And honestly, I at first, I thought it was a little bit concerning to see Caleb lose his cool there, because Well, let's be honest. He was kicked off the team at Iowa State last season, I believe, for under mysterious circumstances. We still don't really know what happened there. All we know is that Caleb has basically said, hey, he's taken personal responsibility and said that it was his fault. But the good news is after the game, I mean, Missouri, the coach, the players, everybody seemed to be very much on Caleb's side. Dennis Gates said Caleb gave us a spark by being ejected. I truly believe that. Without that, we don't win this game. I credit Caleb Grill, his passion that he plays with. So that's certainly another way to look at it. And again, you looked at the post-game video from the locker room that Missouri put out there. Tamar Bates giving Grill a gigantic hug and saying, hey, we got you, man, and all this stuff. And, the teammates are all just dumping water on him and everything, basically just making him feel that love. And that had to mean a lot to him, I'm sure. So I'll stop myself here and say, okay, maybe I'm not. Maybe it really is just passion and not him actually losing his cool a little bit there. So just something I kind of am filing away in the back of my brain right now. Not a huge concern, but no doubt that obviously Missouri getting a couple technical fouls there. By the way, two shots in the ball on a technical foul on the bench at one point in the second half too. That felt awfully harsh, but Missouri was able to overcome all of this, being down 20 points in the second half. And really, I think the game kind of felt like it turned in a big way, actually, when Trent Pierce came into the ball game. And Missouri was able to fight all the way down to within 4 with about 5 minutes left when Pierce was brought out of the game and was mostly down the stretch. It was Noah Carter along with Sean East, Nick Honor, Kurt Lewis, and also Tamar Bates, a 31-9 run by the Tigers to finish the ball game. And obviously another new guy, Kurt Lewis, played a ton down the stretch too, along with Trent Pierce. In my opinion, I think those guys helped come in and change the tone of the game. They both were able to come in fresh and just played really, really hard, obviously. I think as the game went along, Missouri's, if you want to say depth, in this case, I just mean the amount of guys that they were able to play in this game, especially being able to bring in some fresh bodies down the stretch, really felt like that was a huge factor in the Golden Gophers and their ultimate collapse. And speaking of Lewis playing down the stretch, a guy who hasn't played a whole lot so far, I mentioned the Tigers, I think, are still searching for the right combination in the forward spots. Well, I think they're searching for the right wing combination too. And frankly, I think Missouri has a lot of guys right now on this squad who expect to play, and honestly, not all of them are going to. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out. Of course, in theory, it's great to have essentially an unlimited amount of guys you can put on your roster in this day and age. Dennis Gates has pointed that out publicly, that, hey, I have as many spots as I need, basically, when it comes to recruiting. But the downside of that is the reality is a lot of these guys you recruit are going to expect to play. And, well, I guess that's part of the new reality as well. The transfer portal, the amount of transfers is obviously higher than ever. But, I think when it comes to John Tonje, who has played just a couple games here, was injured coming into the season, I think sort of typical, a little bit of rust from him. He's had his moments, made a couple shots here and there, but I think he just looks a little bit rusty right now, maybe a step slow. A little bit of patience is definitely required there. And also with Connor Vanover as well, who played a little bit last night, got his feet wet, but again, didn't do a whole lot, just took one 3-point shot from the outside, I believe. I think that was his lone shot attempt. Yes, just one shot there from Vanover in 7 minutes, couple rebounds, got a steal, but again, just got his feet wet. I think he'll be a much bigger part of the team moving forward. And coming up, some injury updates for the Missouri and Florida game. But you know what? Before we get there, I want to address the elephant in the room. What if Texas A&M and its oodles and oodles of cash, their Scrooge McDuck-like money bin, well, what if they come calling for Eli Drinkwitz? Well, even if they do, Quite frankly, I don't think Eli is going to listen. And I want to explain why coming up here in just a little bit. But first, I want to tell you about Prize Picks, because daily fantasy sports sometimes can be a little bit overly complicated, in my opinion. Well, Prize Picks is the easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. All you have to do is pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. For instance, you could take Brady Cook more than 275.5 passing yards and take Graham Mertz from Florida less than 257.5 passing yards. If you want to say, hey, I think Missouri's going to beat Florida down, well, there's a good way to play it, quite possibly. But you could also put Brady Cook with, say, Steph Curry and LeBron James and make up your own cross-sport kind of action there. So here's what you got to do. Regardless of what you're into, go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. It's Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. So as I sarcastically said on my X feed yesterday, huge day for my colleague Zach Blackerby over at Locked On Auburn, as now the Gus Malzahn buyout of $21 million is no longer the highest buyout in college football history. In fact, now it's not even close. Texas A&M paying Jimbo Fisher well over $70 million just to go away. And by the way, if Jimbo gets another job, none of that is offset, by the way. In Eli Drinkwitz, in his contract, for instance, I do believe, certainly if Missouri fired him, I know this, if in a world where Missouri had fired Drinkwitz, if he would have gotten another job, well, that would have offset what Missouri had owed him in the buyout. Not the case here for Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher. And quite honestly, yes, Texas A&M, your two-time national champions all the way back in 1919 and 1939. The thing is, I just think this whole Jimbo Fisher thing is absolute madness to me. All I know is there's got to be a Texas A&M booster or two who absolutely has money, and I mean massive, massive dump trucks full of money burning a hole in their driveway, I guess, because that's the only way this makes sense to me. Because if you're Texas A&M, again, congratulations on your pre-World War II national championships. I'll be honest, you even go back to 39. Here's a bit of a digression for you. Here's who Texas A&M went undefeated against in 39. Oklahoma A&M, Centenary, Santa Clara, Villanova. Man, what a tough non-con that was. TCU, Baylor, Arkansas, SMU, Rice, Texas. Hey, a real game. Congratulations. And then they beat Tulane in the Sugar Bowl by 1 point. I'm pretty sure the number 6 Missouri Tigers, the Big 8 champions that year with Pitch and Paul Chrisman, I'm just going to say it, we would have taken down Texas A&M in that season too. But you know what? I have to admit, if you look at it on paper, Texas A&M is a slightly better program than Missouri. 9-7 all-time against the Tigers. Not overwhelming, but hey, they have the winning record. Also, Missouri 15-20 all-time in bowl games. A&M 20-22, so a slightly better winning percentage, and they've played in 7 more bowl games as well. But at the same time, the Aggies have not won a conference title since 1998, when Eli Drinkwitz and I were 15 years old. So I just don't know where the Aggie fans and their boosters, more importantly, the big money over there, gets off thinking that they are entitled to a top 10 season every year. It's not as though Texas A&M is terrible this season whatsoever. In fact, they're a pretty good ball club, as they have been every year under Jimbo. The problem is they just haven't been able to find the quarterback yet. Well, I don't know. Maybe use some of that NIL money and go and go find a quarterback. Go find a quarterback in the transfer portal. Go pay the guy a couple $1,000,000 a year. Hell, pay him $7 million a year, and you're still 10% less than what you're paying Jimbo for his buyout. I understand that you all think that you are entitled to top five recruiting classes every year now too, but I wouldn't guarantee that without Jimbo Fisher at the helm. If the next coach doesn't work out, well, you could just be in a endless cycle of cycling through guys like the Nebraska Cornhuskers find themselves in. And by the way, Nebraska, a heck of a lot better tradition than Texas A&M has ever had. And the point here, the point of this whole preamble is, even if you're Eli Drinkwitz and you're going, let's say hypothetically, again, this is all hypothetical here at this point. If Texas A&M delivers $100 million, a 10-year contract, just something absolutely insane. I'm not saying that they're going to do that, but if you're Eli Drinkwitz, are you sure you want to take that job? Maybe the money is just too good to take. Maybe it is, but I don't see A&M necessarily offering that kind of money to Eli Drinkwitz. Could I see them offering it to Lane Kiffin? Maybe. But you know what? Speaking of Auburn, Lane Kiffin, Auburn offered him a ton of money too, and ultimately he decided to stay at Ole Miss. There's a real cost to starting over at a new program and a real risk to it, and it's one that if I'm Eli Drinkwitz, I've already made generational wealth, essentially. And by the way, if I can wring some more out of Missouri, if Texas A&M comes calling, great, fantastic. I'm definitely going to do that. I'm definitely going to tell them to open up a checkbook and, yes, extend me once again. But do I want to uproot my young family where I have 4 young daughters? And by the way, I finally seems like I've gotten roots down here in Missouri. It seems like I should be here for a long time now. I can basically get these people to write whatever check they want. To me, Missouri's NIL is doing pretty good if they're getting Williams Nwaneri, for instance. Ryan Wingo aside, I'd say things are going pretty well for the Tigers at this moment. So again, the money is going to be different, and if that's the one thing, then money's going to win out for Texas A&M. But let's not sit here and pretend like Texas A&M is some blue blood program that is guaranteed to be at the top of college football forever. Again, they have not won a conference title since 1998. What more do you really need to know? Oh, and by the way, I believe I misspoke earlier when I said the 1939 Tigers won the Big 8 championship. No, they won the Big 6 championship. This was before Colorado and Oklahoma State had joined the league. But you know what? Let's talk about some modern football. How about that? Some pretty significant injury updates for Missouri and Florida as well coming in to this ball game. So I want to tell you all about that here coming up in just a second. But first, it is time for your game changer of the week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. And frankly, much like the entire Missouri offensive line this season, Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. And for Connor Tollison, Cameron Johnson, Xavier Delgado, and Armand Mimbu and Javon Foster, all of those guys to come through the way they've come through this season, it's really stunning to me, and I think they deserve all the credit in the world. But Athletic Brewing also deserves all the credit for making a product that is fit for all times, so you can drink them anywhere, anytime, and make any activity even more enjoyable. So you can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. On the official injury report for Missouri, defensive tackle Realus George is on the list as being questionable, as is Tyron Hopper, of course, the linebacker for Missouri. though according to Pete Thamel, his sources are telling him, and well, I'm guessing it's a source within the Missouri Athletic Department, let's be honest. But they're saying that Tyron Hopper will not play against Florida this week after hurting his ankle pretty early in the ball game against the Volunteers last week. Of course, the Tigers already down Chad Bailey for the rest of this season, so it certainly looks like Tristan Newsom and Chuck Hicks will likely be starting and probably playing the lion's share of the snaps for Missouri against Florida. Now, the Gators also having some injury troubles of their own, it would seem. Austin Barber, their starting left tackle, questionable for the ball game as well with a, quote, upper body injury. And also one of their wide receivers, Caleb Douglas, remains out for the ball game with a leg injury as well. And you know what? A few more basketball thoughts just to close it out here. Number one, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me so far is that Missouri's defense has been a lot better than the offense, at least based on my own expectations. Now, statistically, perhaps they're similar, and I think they are just in terms of national rankings and projections. But again, based on my own expectations, I thought this was going to be another high-powered offense and maybe a team that struggled to defend. Well, I think it's been a little bit the opposite way so far. The offense has not been up to my expectations, but I think Missouri's defense has been quite a bit better than last season so far. So actually, I think as Missouri continues to experiment here and figure out what its proper and most optimum rotations are as we get into December basketball and, of course, into SEC play, I actually think that's a good sign that Missouri is playing good defense early, because I think the offense is going to come along. And speaking of people that are further along than I expected, I mentioned Jordan Butler already and Trent Pierce as well, the true freshman, but also Anthony Robinson playing a lot more key minutes than I would have expected. Looks just, again, like a veteran really already is what I've been most impressed by. Of course, he's a really long, lanky player, has some real high upside defensively, and I've just been impressed by his ability to calmly lead the team and just make good, smart basketball plays so far. And one more thing just to close it out here. One thing I'm a little bit concerned about for Missouri, the Tigers just not getting to the line very much this year. With 45 seconds left in the game, Nick Honor took a really long three-pointer, and I get it. He was hot in the ball game. Just did not love that shot at the time. If we're having to settle for three-pointers that are 4 to 5 feet behind the line, I think that's just a little bit of a symptom of what I was concerned about in the first half. Just Missouri having to settle for too many long jump shots. And I think, again, the inability to get to the free throw line, well, I think that's a pretty obvious symptom of that as well. Missouri's got to make it easier on themselves as we go along here into the season. But you know what? As always, thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And you know what? I will be back on, let's say, Sunday morning. I'm thinking Sunday morning for your Missouri-Florida recap. Game kicks off, 6:30? Yeah, that's going to be way too late for this sleepy young, well, let's say sleepy middle-aged man to stay up and do a podcast on a Saturday night. So I'll see you all Sunday morning for a Florida recap right here on Locked On Mizzou.